In the quiet town of Villisca, Iowa, nestled away in the heart of the United States, the year was 1912. It was the evening of June 9th, a night that would become etched in history as the backdrop for one of the most chilling unsolved crimes ever recorded. The Villisca Axe Murders, as they would come to be known, sent shockwaves through this close-knit community. The Moore family, a prosperous and respected household, consisted of Josiah B. Moore, aged 43, his wife Sarah, née Montgomery, 39, and their 4 children, Herman Montgomery, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5. This family was well-liked and well-known in Villisca. On that fateful night, young Mary Catherine Moore had invited her friends Ina May, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 12, to spend the night at the Moore residence. The evening was made memorable by their visit to the Presbyterian Church, where they all took part in the Children's Day program, a program Sarah had lovingly coordinated. The clock struck 9:30 p.m. as the program concluded, and the Moores and the Stillinger sisters, their hearts full of joy, set off for the Moore home, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. Morning broke, and the day was June 10th, 1912. As the sun rose, a neighbor, Mary Peckham, began to grow concerned. She noticed that the Moore family hadn't emerged to tend to their morning chores, a rare occurrence in this tight-knit community. Mary Peckham knocked on the Moores' door, but no one answered. The door was locked, an eerie sign of what lay within. Peckham released the Moores' chickens and reached out to Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Ross, much like Mary Peckham, knocked on the door, but there was no response. Shouting yielded the same silence. Ross unlocked the front door with his key, and with trepidation, he ventured inside. As he opened the guest bedroom door, he was met with a scene that would forever haunt his dreams. There, on the bed, lay the lifeless bodies of Ina and Lena Stillinger. The horror of the situation compelled Ross to summon Henry Hank Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer. Horton arrived swiftly, and the subsequent search of the house revealed a nightmare beyond imagination. The entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls had been bludgeoned to death, their lifeless bodies bearing the grotesque marks of the attacker. The murder weapon, chillingly, was an axe belonging to Josiah Moore, discovered in the guest room where the Stillinger sisters met their gruesome fate. Doctors later determined that the murders had occurred between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 spent cigarettes were found in the attic, suggesting that the killer or killers had patiently waited there, biding their time until the victims were asleep. The official tour disputes this detail, claiming no cigarettes were found. The horror began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore slept. Josiah bore the brunt of the attack, his face savagely mutilated to the point where his eyes were missing. The ceiling above him bore a gouge mark, a stark reminder of the murderous rampage. The killer or killers used the blade of the axe on Sarah, while the blunt end was used on the rest of the victims. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul all succumbed to the same gruesome fate, bludgeoned in their heads, much like their parents. Afterward, the murderer returned to the master bedroom to inflict more violence upon Josiah and Sarah before descending the stairs to the guest bedroom, where Ina and Lena lay. Astonishingly, it seemed the murderer had a particular sense of cruelty, as a 4-pound slab of bacon was found next to the axe. The scene further perplexed investigators when they found untouched food and bloody water during their search. Regrettably, curious onlookers contaminated the crime scene, as they were allowed in to see if they could piece together the puzzle, inadvertently disturbing the evidence. Investigators concluded that all victims except Lena Stillinger were asleep when the murders took place. She had evidently been awake and struggled against her assailant, found lying crosswise on the bed with a defensive wound on her arm. Her nightgown was pushed up to her waist, leading to speculation that the killer had indecently molested her. However, this theory would later be disproven. The small town of Villisca was left in shock and fear, and soon a plethora of potential suspects emerged, each casting their own dark shadow over the investigation. One such suspect was Reverend George Kelly, an English-born traveling minister who was in town the night of the murders. Reverend Kelly had a peculiar history, having suffered a mental breakdown in his youth and later being accused of indecent conduct with young women and girls. He had come to Villisca to teach at the Children's Day services, the same event the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters attended. Reverend Kelly, however, left town between 5 and 5:50 a.m. on the day the bodies were discovered. Kelly's confession during the trial cast a cloud of suspicion over him, but the jury was not convinced of his guilt. The Reverend's behavior after the trial, including his fascination with the case and multiple letters written to police and investigators, raised further doubts. It was unclear whether he possessed intimate knowledge of the crimes due to personal involvement, or was merely caught in a delusional fantasy. The investigation took a sinister turn in 1914, when Kelly was arrested for sending obscene material through the mail, targeting a woman who had applied for a job as his secretary. He was admitted to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the National Mental Hospital in Washington, D.C. Authorities once again speculated about Kelly's potential involvement in the Villisca murders, but no concrete evidence could be found. After 2 trials, Reverend Kelly was acquitted. Frank Fernando Jones, a Villisca resident and Iowa state senator, became another focal point of suspicion. Josiah Moore had worked for Jones at his implement store, but their business relationship had soured. Rumors swirled about an indecent affair between Moore and Jones's daughter-in-law, but these claims lacked substantial evidence. Another theory emerged, suggesting that Senator Jones had hired a man named William Blackie Mansfield to carry out the murders. The suspicions were fueled by a similar axe murder that occurred 9 months before the Villisca tragedy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In both cases, the victims had their skulls crushed with an axe, and bed sheets covered the windows to conceal the gruesome acts. Detective James Newton Wilkerson, along with the Burns Detective Agency, believed Mansfield was a cocaine-addicted serial killer responsible for a string of axe murders, including the Moore family's deaths. Pressure from Jones led to Mansfield's release, despite suspicions that he may have been the perpetrator. R.H. Thorpe, a restaurant owner from Shenandoah, Iowa, claimed to have seen Mansfield boarding a train in Clarinda on the morning after the Villisca murders. Mansfield asserted that he had walked from Villisca, which, if true, would undermine his alibi. Additionally, Mrs. Vina Tompkins of Marshalltown was on her way to testify that she had overheard 3 men plotting the Moore family's murder just before the tragedy unfolded. Amid this web of suspects and theories, another man, Henry Lee Moore, emerged. He was a suspected serial killer, unrelated to the Moore family, who had used an axe to murder his mother and grandmother several months after the Villisca murders. The striking similarities between these cases fueled strong suspicions that the same axe-wielding serial killer was responsible. However, the case remained unsolved. In their 2017 book, The Man from the Train, Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James examined the Villisca murders as part of a larger series of killings that they attributed to a single serial killer. Paul Muller, or Miller, an immigrant possibly from Germany, was identified as the likely perpetrator. According to their research, Muller was responsible for at least 59 murders in 14 separate incidents, each sharing common features, including the use of an axe as the murder weapon and an indecent motive towards young girls. The case, however, remains unsolved. Villisca, Iowa became home to a haunting legacy. The Villisca Axe Murder House, where the gruesome murders occurred, transformed into a chilling tourist attraction for ghost hunters and those with a morbid fascination for horror. The house was purchased in 1994, restored to its 1912 condition, and opened to the public. Brave souls could stay overnight, paying $428 for the privilege, and many reported eerie paranormal experiences. Visions of a man with an axe roaming the halls and faint cries of children became commonplace. In November 2014, the haunting took a sinister turn. Robert Stephen Lorson Jr., a visitor on a regular paranormal excursion with friends, was found with a self-inflicted stab wound to his chest, eerily mirroring the events of the 1912 murders. Lorson was rushed to the hospital where he recovered from his injuries, but he never publicly revealed what had occurred that night.